Right now, the day's biggest news stories from a Vegas perspective. This is the Vegas Take with Sharp and Shapiro.
All right, what's up, Vegas? It is the Vegas Take, rolling at you hump day. That's right, it is Wednesday. Glad you could join us. And boy, do we have a lot to get to today. Glad you're here. Not every day you get a former Democratic presidential candidate who happens to be a war hero. Seth Moulton's going to be joining us in hour number 2. Excited for that. Also, you might have heard this name, JD, David Jenkins Jr. He is the top transfer that went over to UNLV. He's going to be joining us in hour number 3. And a story of a racist tirade. Did you hear about this one? African-American man dropping off his kid at school, gets into a fender bender with a white teacher. And the teacher calls him the N-word. It's caught on video, calls him a bunch of racial slurs. She loses his job. His name is Rashid Noel. He's going to be joining us coming up at the bottom of the hour. So there's a lot of racial divide in this country, even here in Las Vegas. There's a story of UNLV police investigating a shooting threat on a bathroom wall targeting African Americans. And now we have this situation in Fort Worth, as you've heard of, this innocent young woman in a home shot through a window. African American woman, white officer charged with murder. So this is a good day to have a good discussion. And I figured this would be a great day to have Minister Stretch Sanders come in studio here, who has lived in Vegas for 8 years. And he's done a lot of good things for a lot of people here. And I appreciate you coming in, Stretch. Thank you so much for being here.
Bless you guys. Good morning. Power to you. I'm so blessed and honored to be here today.
Yeah, and I want to get your perspective on a lot of these things. So let me ask you this. Obviously, there's racial divide. Sadly, there's racist all over the place, right? But do you feel like right now there's more racial divide and more tension than maybe there was when Obama left office?
Absolutely. I think when Barack Obama became in office, I think, number one, I think he gave a lot of people hope. I also think, too, that racism was just as alive when he was president, but that hope overshadowed some things, and so it made people believe that the "we shall overcome" has become we have overcame.
Right,
and that's just not really so. I think the difference between the Obama administration and the Trump administration is that Trump is using some rhetoric that is not really "yes, we can" or "we shall overcome," and so some of the language he's using is kind of giving fuel to some racist fire that was already burning, because we understand that Trump is not all the blame.
Right.
Trump is a product. He's a symptom. He's not like he's the leader that created racism. This country has been racist way before Donald Trump came on the scene.
I agree.
He's not the first racist president.
And I totally agree with that as well. I think that there are a lot of closet racists that now believe that they can actually be openly racist because of some of the things that Donald Trump says. And I'm a Donald Trump supporter.
Absolutely. And I think racism doesn't mean that you have to make comments particularly about race. It can be how you behave. It could be the policies you put in place. It can be how you choose to oppress black, brown, poor communities of gender. So it's bigger than just saying like, oh, I dislike people of color.
Right.
And so I think that in the Trump administration, I do believe that in this generation, the same way you look around, there are more individuals who are starting to kind of wake up to what's going on. Some individuals, unfortunately, are waking up, but waking up to the wrong thing. They're waking up to racism, waking up to hatred. But I also, want to make it clear that I don't believe that not necessarily every person who supports Trump is racist. I think that people supported Trump for different reasons.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think there are people that are extreme that think that, and I'm not one of those Trump supporters, but I can tell you right now, my co-host, JD, is not racist in the least, but he does support Donald Trump. There are people out there that don't like his rhetoric, don't like the things he says. For example, immigrants, So let me ask you this question. Do you think Donald Trump is a racist?
I do personally.
You do? Tell us why you feel that way.
So even though I can say some of his supporters may not be, that can be because they can pick and choose why they supported him, whether it was because they thought that he was going to raise the economy when it came to business, or whether they just wanted a fresh win. They wanted somebody who kind of went against the grain, whatever. Why do people still support him now? I really don't know, considering the fact how he is as a leader. So I think that if you did support him in the initial beginning, it was genuine. I don't really understand why that will continue now after we have saw how he behaved in Puerto Rico, throwing paper towels, how he refers to
disrespectful.
But I just think that he's just a disrespectful person. He's not what we thought.
Definitely agree with that.
But also, I think that Trump can be a blessing in disguise for communities of color. This is what we've been asking for, to force us to unite, to force us to come together. Sometimes, Obama put us, in a sense, to sleep because we all kept saying we should overcome. Now we think we overcame and we stopped working.
Mm-hmm.
And so now Trump comes in office and we acting like, oh, my God, the world's coming to an end. The same thing was happening. This is not something that's different. The same policies were going on. The same ghettos on the west side of Las Vegas were happening when Obama was in office. They didn't just come create
not a lot has
ghetto.
changed, you're saying. Yeah.
I understand. Not a lot has really progressed.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't just put all this on the Trump administration. White supremacy is something that is systemic. It's a system that trickles down.
Can I interject with white? Let me interject and ask you this because I agree with you. White supremacy is a big issue. We had a white supremacist a few months ago. You might have heard about this. Who was arrested? Who wanted to shoot a bunch of African Americans and homosexuals and synagogues?
Mm-hmm.
He was arrested. Then you have people on television like Tucker Carlson, who I cannot stand, who goes on Fox News and says white supremacy is a hoax. The idea of white supremacy is a hoax. White supremacy is not a hoax. That's why a white supremacist went into Walmart in Texas, El Paso, and killed 22 people. So what would you say to somebody like that on television who says white supremacy is a hoax?
Well, I would say that a lot of us are racially ignorant, which can still come across racist, and a lot of us are just point-blank racist, while our hearts is just filled up with hatred. Some of us make statements, and I mean those who are of the European white ancestry. They may make statements or do certain things that may come across racist. But it may not. It may be one of them things where good intentions still offend.
Right.
I think that the bottom line is it's an ignorant thing. It's an ignorance issue. So individuals who may think, because you have some people who said racism, I thought racism was over with. It's 2019.
Well,
they
that's
don't understand
ridiculous.
that racism is not just saying, "Oh, I hate you. You're the N-word." Racism is the ability to take somebody's power. Is the ability to be able to say, "I can take your application and throw it in the trash."
Because
Black people have no ownership. Black people, Hispanic people, people of color, we're not on the top. So therefore, we can't even be racist. Racism is a thing that only white people can be.
Right.
So when people say, I thought racism was over, if you look in Summerlin and see Whole Foods and different areas that flourishing than other sides of town, you come to the west side and you still see project housing, that's racist to me. Because why aren't we building that same economic development on black sides of town, Hispanic sides of town?
Could it be possible because they don't think it would be profitable there because people don't have the same money they have in Summerlin?
Exactly. People don't have the same money, not because people just happen to be born broke. People don't have the same money because the way the cards were dealt.
But isn't that a business decision, not necessarily racism?
No, because white people are benefiting off these businesses because of slavery, because of racism.
A lot of generational wealth, which is what you're attributing to,
exactly
what you're referencing here,
Yep.
is due to redlining.
Redlining, gentrification,
which took place in the 1950s and 60s, where the banks would look at inner city areas and they would draw a red line around it, and they wouldn't give loans to those specific families for homes and for businesses.
Stretch, I want to get we'll get back to Donald Trump. We'll get back to politics, but I want to talk about law enforcement. This is a huge issue facing this country right now. Now, any reasonable person will understand, at least I believe, that the majority of police officers are not racist. I personally believe the majority, not all, but the majority of police officers are decent people that are heroes that protect and serve. However, there are some bad ones out there. Now we have this story in Fort Worth where this woman is sitting in a home, but now we're learning news stories that the nephew says that she did pick up a gun and point it through the window. However, the specifics that are coming in are that the officer did not follow proper protocol. He did not say he was law enforcement. He did not ring the doorbell, yet he was still charged with murder, which surprises me a little bit. It's a horrible story. It's a tragedy. What do you make of this?
So I think that if you look at that case and you look at the case of the sister who ran into the wrong apartment, even with how she received 10 years, this officer, he's getting charged with murder, but given 10 years, that's not a realistic sentence. When you have people who are black, who shot warning shots at dogs, who received life in prison. You have black men and women who are still in prison for selling marijuana, and somebody can literally get murder and get 10 years for a murder charge. And so I think that we live in a society where there's still a lack of respect for black life. I would actually disagree with you and say that I think that the majority of police officers are indeed racist.
You really believe that?
I believe
I'm
that.
sad to hear you say that.
I believe that because of the simple fact that this is a racist country. That's like me. I would go to say majority of men are sexist. This is a sexist country. Anytime a country or society is built in a foundation, it's easy for those to subscribe to that.
Okay, but let me interject to what you said, and I feel horrible that you feel that way, and I'm not necessarily saying you're wrong. I tend to disagree a little bit. I think that the majority of police officers, let me put it to you this way, I don't think that the majority of police officers wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to kill an innocent African-American today. I don't think that's happening. Here's my problem with some of these cases, and let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about Ferguson for a second. I personally believe that everybody rushed to judgment and assumed that that white officer killed Michael Brown because he was black. And everybody said, hands up, don't shoot. And then we learned the narrative. We learned the evidence. There were African Americans that testified in court that Michael Brown never put his hands up, that he charged towards the officer. Listen, I feel horrible for Michael Brown's family. That community went through hell, and I wish they didn't. But all the evidence pointed to the fact that Michael Brown had just committed a strong-arm robbery. He attacked that police officer. He went after that police officer's gun. And like I said, African-Americans testified, never put his hands up, charged towards the officer. That officer's life was ruined, and I don't think that officer did anything wrong. And Barack Obama sent some people to Michael Brown's funeral without knowing all the facts in the case. Listen, are there injustices to African Americans by police every day? Absolutely. All I'm trying to say is in that specific case, you had Reverend Al Sharpton, you had Jesse Jackson, and all these leaders, come out saying how this officer was a murderer when the evidence pointed to the opposite of that Michael Brown, I hate to say it this way, but I personally believe Michael Brown, if you attack a police officer, if you go after a police officer's gun, I don't care what color your skin is. In my personal opinion, you deserve to get shot if you're that stupid. And I'm sorry, with all due respect to Michael Brown, I believe he deserved to be shot because the evidence pointed to the fact that he went after the officer. What do you say to that?
Well, this is actually the first time I've heard it presented in that way. I think if it was presented, and I'm not saying your research is inaccurate, but I just never heard it presented like that because I know that it was if it was that plain, I don't think that it would have blew up like that. You know, I mean, there was witnesses on the spot who said, even with the fact that I'm saying, okay, let's say if they exaggerated what happened, he still laid in the street uncovered for 6 hours.
Well, my response to that is he was dead, so they weren't going to save his life. And number two, yes, I do think 6 hours is a long time, but in some of these investigations, I'll give you an example, Texas, El Paso. Do you know some of those dead bodies were in there for more than 24 to 48 hours? It's horrible to think that, but these were a bunch of different people of different races, and the reason why those dead bodies, and an investigator would tell you this, is because it's part of the investigation. They can't touch the body, and they're conducting an investigation. That was a horrible situation, but I'm not going by hearsay. I'm going by what was said in the courtroom.
Right.
And in the courtroom, there were at least 6 African Americans that testified that not only did Michael Brown never put his hands up, but he actually charged the officer. Now, why am I bringing this up? Not to say that there's not racism out there. I'm with you on that. Every cop that is a racist, I don't want that cop to be out there on the streets. Okay, I want everyone to be treated equally in a perfect world. But
you're suggesting that there is a lack of compliance.
That's another part of this that I was going to get to. But in that situation of Michael Brown, yes, I did think that people overreacted and they painted Michael Brown out to be a hero, where in my personal opinion, he's no hero. Now, Eric Garner, completely different situation. Now, Eric Garner might have been breaking the law. He was selling cigarettes. He does have a rap sheet. Does that mean he deserved to die the way he died? Absolutely not.
But this is where it still falls into race. You have white men who run into churches with machine guns.
Right.
Shoot up, and you've never heard a black person going into a white church shooting up anybody. You have white people who go into churches, movie theaters, schools, kill a bunch of people, and then get escorted out. It was a story of a white man charging at an officer in Michigan, butt naked, chasing at this officer.
Yeah.
The officer's running from him.
Right.
And he lived. So whether Mike Brown charged at him or things like that, at the end of the day, there's a certain way to deal with it. White men are not being killed in the same way. It's plenty of stories where white men are charging that white officers.
I agree.
But
I
you know
what
what,
though?
Yeah. Black people are viewed as criminal.
Right. Well, I'm
viewed as monsters.
It's
easy to pull the trigger on us.
I can, and that's wrong if that's happening. And I don't disagree with you necessarily, but my personal opinion is I'm going to be very fair with this and say, if you charge at an officer, I don't care what the color of your skin is. If that officer fires the trigger, you probably deserved it because that's a threat towards the officer. I do think a problem in our society is compliance. Doesn't necessarily mean if you always comply with an officer, you're going to get out scot-free. Sadly, that's not the case. I remember that case in Minnesota where a guy was pulled over, African-American in the passenger seat, was shot and killed for doing nothing except reaching into his pocket. He said he had a gun, but he wasn't a criminal. That is a horrible case. But I do think in a lot of situations, if people do comply, it gives them the best chance of getting out of there without getting hurt. I think we need to teach people to comply with officers, do exactly what they tell you to do, whether they're right or wrong. Unfortunately, in that situation, they have the power, and I think you have to comply. I mean, you would agree with that, right?
Yeah, so two things. I agree that, obviously, if an officer is in danger and you charge an officer, they're going to defend themselves.
Right.
And Michael Brown was 6'4", 300 pounds.
So, but
he was a big guy.
But I also believe that you also got to understand too. Prior to Michael Brown, there was numerous cases.
Mm-hmm.
After Michael Brown, there's numerous cases. You could take Michael Brown out the situation, and it's still.
But that was a big case because it made national news, right?
They got attention.
But I will say that at the end of the day, when it comes to compliance, people say, "Oh, the person shouldn't have ran." Black people, we don't have the same thought process that other communities have, even brown communities, when we get put up by the police because of the rate of that we're being killed. Obviously, there are some white men who were killed in Las Vegas, Eric Scott, but that's not the standard. White people don't get pulled over and think, "Oh, I can possibly die." When I get pulled over, I'm Facebook Live and I'm sending my location. I actually feel like I'm in danger. It's not as simple as just comply and be nice. Mm-hmm. We comply and we die. We wear hoodies when we die.
This isn't the first time I've heard that. I have other friends, African-American friends, who have just told me the same thing that you told me, that, listen, it's different than if it was you. We're scared. We're scared for our lives. And it's sad that you feel that way. And I believe you when you say that. I'm just trying to come up with something that,
but I agree with you.
You can't run.
You cannot run. You cannot run. I think that we have to start teaching in the black community. First of all, we should probably start teaching. That's something I'm working on now. Know your rights classes. I think that when you know your rights and you're confident,
that's important.
That builds up. Some people run because it's like, okay,
and I think
I don't
a
want to
cop
be
will
violated.
respect you more if you know your rights.
I don't want to be killed.
Stretch, do you think that pop culture has had anything to do with the disparity between African Americans and the police? Like, for example, the song "F the Police" by NWA. Do you believe that has had a lasting effect on how that you feel, or how that African Americans feel towards police officers?
Well, even being a minister, that's not something I play in my household, but that was a powerful song that I still think holds a relevance. It's almost like the rapper YG has a song called "F Donald Trump." Mm-hmm. I think these songs are trying to send messages that we're not really saying F the police or F Donald Trump as a person. We're saying F the system of white supremacy that's creating and generating white racist police officers and white racist leaders. I do think that pop culture has, in some sense, it has probably dramatized it because we have the ability to record it now. Philando Castile, who you mentioned, who said, "I have a permit to carry a gun. I'm going to reach for it right now." He was shot.
That was horrible.
The officer was afraid when he walked up to the vehicle because, once again, we still don't see. This is an Asian man. So when I say that the majority of white officers are racist, I'm talking about a policing system that is rooted in white supremacy.
I know I would be
racism.
scared if you're white or black. I would be scared, and I'm not an officer. I'm not trained. But if somebody says they have a gun, and I tell them not to reach into their and listen, that guy did not deserve to be shot. But if I say I have a gun in a car, the last thing I'm going to do is reach into my pocket. I'm not saying the guy should have shot. I want to ask you about Byron Williams, because I know you've done a lot of work you've done a lot of things in raising awareness to this cause. Now, what this is this is a guy who was on a bicycle who I shouldn't say ran away, but went on his bike, pedaled away from the police, and was shot and killed. Did not have a weapon on him, had drugs on him, but did not have a weapon on him, correct? How does the police officer shoot him? I don't understand.
Well, for clarity, so he was bike riding on the west side of town, which is
and this is in Vegas.
In Las Vegas, which is the black side of town.
Yep.
It's about 5 a.m. He was stopped for his bike light being out. They said, excuse me, they said something to him, like calling him over. He takes off bike pedaling.
And wasn't shot. I apologize for saying that. Yeah.
By the time he ran a pretty good, almost a block. By the time he got there, he's exhausted at this point.
Right.
But they find drugs on him. Okay, so that's probably why he ran.
Right.
And from the time they get up on him, they're cussing, get on the ground, MF, very vulgar language. He's saying, "I can't breathe," repeatedly. "I can't breathe, I can't breathe."
Did they hit him?
They didn't hit him, but they were on him too long. They were on him, I think, 30 seconds too long. And
they're swearing at him.
And they're swearing at him. They was on him. They waited a minute later to call the paramedics. And so the officer says, "Well, you're tired because you effing ran." If somebody's telling you, "I can't breathe," he's trying to catch his breath. Why would you put a leg on them, which is going to further, put pressure on their air tubes? And so that's another case to me that, once again, we're not really. First of all, I have a big problem with deploying masses of white officers. I don't think a white officer should ever step foot in a community of color until they've been seasoned, until they went through extensive classes. I don't care about your best friend being black, your girlfriend being black. You cannot, because it's a different culture. In the Japanese culture, wearing shoes in a household is disrespectful. In our culture, in the black culture, people say, take my shoes off. If you feel comfortable, take them off. If you don't, take them, keep them on. It's a difference in culture. We don't really understand how to respect other cultures. And the black culture, unfortunately, has been denigrated to just being a culture of violence.
Mm-hmm.
The officer who is a captain even told me where, we stopped him because basically we thinking he's suspicious in so many words. Who are we supposed to stop?
That was my next question. What did he do? And we only have 2 minutes here and we got to take a break. But my question is, it's a guy riding on a bike. Why did they stop him in the first place? How did they know he had drugs on him?
What I was told was it's an area that residents have told them it's a bunch of drug dealers and it's a bunch of dope fiends.
But isn't it illegal to stop somebody for no reason? I don't understand
Stop and frisk is illegal, but if you do a probable cause stop, which
what was
is
the probable cause?
The bike light being out.
That's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. I'll give you this. If I'm riding a bike at night somewhere, a cop and maybe one of the lights are out, a cop is not going to stop.
They're going to say, "Hey, brother, get that bike light fixed."
Right, exactly.
But because this is an area that's supposed to be ridden in crime, ridden in violence, he's black. He has to be a criminal.
However, and by the way, this is another tragic, horrible story. I wish this didn't happen, but again, and I don't want to put blame on this poor young man, but if he didn't run from the police and he complied, he had drugs on him, take responsibility for that, he would have been arrested, he would still be alive today. I mean, you have to agree with that, right?
And also, when you run from the police, you look so much more guilty than you may or may not be.
Well, this is the thing. We have to look at why we running.
Right.
We can't see black people, white people, we having a conversation about the same thing, but we're treated two different ways. So our opinions, our perspectives are going to be a little different. So obviously, in a perfect world, brother, when I get pulled over, I have windows down, lights on.
Right.
I have a different tone because I understand. I'm 6'10". I'm black. I'm a threat off the back.
I hate to cut you off. I want you to continue this conversation because it's a good conversation we're having. I want you to stick around for a few more segments if you can, because I think this is important for everybody. Coming up next, Rashid Noel, the person who videoed a teacher calling him the N-word. She was fired. He's coming up next. Stretch, I want you to stick around and be a part of this conversation as well. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to The Vegas Take.